Hello and welcome to How to Tuesday. Organize your research from notes to outline. I'm Claire, your teaching and learning librarian. I'm also the host of How to Tuesday, so I decided that I would talk about research, organizing your research this week because I love talking about it. It makes me feel very happy. So that's what we're going to talk about today. This is who I am. These are my deets. If you ever want to come talk to me and get some personalized advice for how to organize your research and to take notes. So today, what are we going to talk about? We're talking about how to save your articles when you're researching, how to organize your notes when you're researching, and then finally, how to keep track of your citations. I wanted to have a moment of silence for the card catalog because thanks to the internet and technology, we now get to read articles anytime, anywhere. We do not have to read them physically in the library. We can take them out of the library and we can read them anywhere on our computers. And it makes it so much easier to organize them, to keep track of them, to keep your notes, everything organized. It's beautiful. Saving articles. So the first thing you're going to do when you're like doing research for a paper and you found lots of articles that you're going to want to use in your paper, make sure that you're saving the article so that you can get back to it later. I know that this one seems kind of obvious, but it's not always super obvious. So there's a few different methods you can use to save the article and to get back to it later. So number one, and I see a lot of students doing this, is to copy and paste the permalink or the URL to the article and to keep them all in one single running document. So this is best if you're using articles that you found in lots of different places. So if you found them in like Google versus Google Scholar versus Pirate Search, which is the library's search function on our website. If you're finding articles from lots of places, it's actually easy to make it so that you're saving them all together in one place if you do this method and you keep them all in a document. Number two, you can save them to a bookmarks folder on your browser. This is the method that I have always chosen. I was a history major in college, so instead of exams, we had papers. So I was always working on lots of different papers at any given time. And I thought it was really easy to create a folder on my Google Chrome bookmarks bar. I would create a folder for each class that I was working on, and I would save all my relevant articles for each class to the relevant folder that way. And finally, you can save articles within Pirate Search itself if that's the only search function that you're using. Tip here is to use the same method for all of your articles to keep them in one place. That just makes it easy so that you don't have to think, okay, well, where did I put this one? And I can't remember where I put that one. If it's all in one place, you don't have to search. Organizing your notes. So again, you'll want to be consistent. Once you pick a method, stick to that method for all of your notes for a given class or a given paper or assignment. Try to keep them all in one place. So some possible methods. This first one is the one that I personally use. One long Word doc. It's usually like tons and tons of pages long. So I take notes on each article and I separate them out with headings. That way I can tell. So here's this article and then here's this article, and I don't get confused about which notes belong to which article. A spreadsheet is really good, a really good method if you're looking at one thing across lots of articles. So like if you're writing a paper and you're looking at the methodology that scientists use when they research climate change, and all you really are interested in is the methodology across lots of articles, this can be an easy way for you to kind of track that down because the way that the columns work makes it visually arranged a little more easily. And then I just wanted to have a shout out for the pen and paper folks out there. I'm not sure if you're out there right now listening, but if you are, you can always do that. That's always a tried and true method for you guys. Tip finally is to keep your notes and your full citations together to keep track of who said what. So it's no use if you have notes, but you can't trace it back to the actual article that you were talking about. Because remember, anytime you refer to someone else's ideas, in a paper or in any kind of assignment, you've got to cite it. So it makes it so much easier when your notes themselves are keeping track of who said what. So there's a few different common methods for note taking. This is probably the most common one that I see is the structured summary method. You may be already using that method and you just weren't aware that it had a name. So for each article, you're going to basically summarize it. You're going to note down the big picture stuff, the important information from each article. And it's almost going to read like a bibliography or like an annotated bibliography because we've got, okay, here's article one, here's the title and the author or the relevant information. And then you've got notes from that article here. And then under that, you've got the next citation for the next article. And then you've got your notes under that. So it reads like a bibliography just with annotations and with comments and summaries underneath each article. So I like to focus, these are the three things that I like to think about and to note down when I'm doing my first reading and my first kind of note-taking run is what are the main ideas? What are the big ideas? What's the evidence, right? What are they using to back up those big ideas? And then finally, how closely does it relate to my topic? So this is one that sometimes I'll even go in and I'll color code. So the articles that are super closely related, super relevant to my topic, I'll make like green. I'll make some part of it green to indicate like, yes, this one was super relevant. And the ones that are less relevant, but still maybe have good information, I'll make them be like purple or something else to kind of differentiate. Okay, so these ones were a little bit less relevant. So I'll put them like towards the bottom maybe. And again, it makes it easier for you and you avoid clutter, you avoid getting things confused when you're separating your notes out visually by article. So using headings or making the color text be different for each. You can also highlight. And also one thing I wanted to point out here is I know it's really hard to fall into the trap of, well, what should I note down? Sometimes I see students that are reading articles and they're highlighting only, they just get so excited with the highlighting that they highlight every single word. And so it's like, well, this is now just the exact same article, only it's yellow now. So taking notes, figuring out what is important enough to write down, we'll talk about in a hot second, but keeping these three big questions in your mind as you're deciding what kind of notes to write down, what kind of notes to take can be really helpful. Method number two is kind of theme-based. So instead of organizing your notes by article, organize them by theme instead. This is a really helpful method for if you're in like a social science class and you're doing a literature review. So then the way that you're thinking through your topic is not this person said this, next article, this person said this, where you're simply going through and summarizing each article. Instead, you're synthesizing lots of articles based around a common theme. So the structured summary on the left, this is kind of what it's going to look like, right? You're going to have some way to figure out to note down the article that you were looking at. What was their argument? What was their evidence? Were there any quotes that I thought were really important that I needed to write down exactly word for word? And then finally, what are my thoughts? Do I have questions, thoughts, analysis that I want to add on to my notes here? So an example of taking that and making it theme-based would be, okay, so if my paper is about climate change, one theme is maybe causes of the problem. So what are the causes? What are the possible causes of climate change? Well, this article says this, but then this article says this. So we're not talking about the entire article. We're talking about the part of the article in which they said, here are the causes of climate change. It's just another way of sort of clustering out your notes. So take your cue from the assignment. If your assignment is an annotated bibliography where you are truly going to keep your notes you're going to keep them separate and you're not synthesizing and you're just looking at each article individually, then you should do that method number one, the structured summary, right? Where you're thinking about each article on its own. Whereas if you're doing a literature review or if your assignment description uses the word synthesis, if you're expected to synthesize information from lots of different articles, that means, okay, I'm going to look for a commonality and I'm going to sort of compare and contrast these articles to each other based around a common theme. That's a literature review. So if I want to do that, then maybe I do method number two. Put your own reactions, thoughts, and analysis in a different color or section. This is to avoid plagiarism because remember when I said whenever you are using someone's ideas that are not your own, you have to include a citation no matter what citation style you're using. And so when something is your own thoughts, your own analysis, your own reaction, your own interpretation, you don't have to cite that. That's your own thoughts. And so keeping those visually distinct from your notes that were lifted from the article itself, that can be really helpful when you're actually writing the paper and you're deciding, what do I need to cite and what do I not need to cite? List the full citation with your notes for each article. That's just a way to keep track. So remember, okay, my notes for this one, okay, oh, that's right, I was talking about this article when I wrote these things down. That's just another way to kind of keep them visually distinct. Mark the page number if you're noting down direct quotes. So I know for a fact for APA style and Chicago style, if you are using a direct quote where you're copying the words word for word from an article, you have to use quotation marks to visually indicate these are not my words, these are the words of this article. But then also for your in-text citation there, you have to put the page number if you're directly quoting something. And so you just get out ahead of that confusion and mark the page number down if you're noting down direct quotes so that you don't have to, Control F and search for the quote later on when you're actually writing the paper to figure out what page did they say that on. Just go ahead and note that down when you're taking your notes. So if you take good notes, they can turn into a really solid outline. And if you write a solid outline, it's not actually that hard to turn that into a good paper. The hinge there is to be judicious in what you choose to write down and review your notes often. So what I choose to note down the first time I read an article, it tends to be like everything. I note everything down because that's just kind of my instinct because, maybe I don't know what kind of argument I want to make. I don't know what direction I want to take this paper. So, well, this might be relevant to me later on, so I'll just go ahead and note it down. But once I've done that, I'm not done. So as I do more research and as I refine my topic and my argument and my ideas for the angle that I want to take on this paper, things that I had chosen to note down in that first reading may not be relevant by the time I'm ready to write my paper. And so I go back pretty often and I'll cut things out if they're no longer relevant to my paper, if I've taken it in a different direction. So that way, when you have fewer notes, there's fewer information for you to wade through and to decide, okay, how can I put this into my paper? So when you're actually taking notes and you're in the moment and you're thinking, oh, is this something that I should be noting down in my notes or should I not? Is it just a fun, interesting piece of information? Think about, could I drop this into my paper later? Does this particular piece of information from this article directly support a claim or an argument that I want to make? Because if it doesn't, if it's just an interesting tidbit of information, then maybe it's really not worth noting down if you're not sure how it's directly going to support your argument. I wanted to point out a couple of things. So I wanted to show you an example of the way that I take my notes, just so that you can visually understand. So right here, you can see I've got it organized out by citation. So I've used these little dashes to sort of differentiate, okay, here's the citation. Now everything that you see after this is notes for this particular article. I used APA style to make my citation. So note a couple of things here. So note my liberal use of quotation marks. Whenever the author said something that I don't feel capable of summarizing in the moment, and I just want to note down what they said exactly word for word, I use quotation marks. I use them very liberally. That is how I differentiate what was my own interpretation of the article and what was the actual words of the article. And then in parentheses here, 14, you can see that is the page number. That is the page on which they said this quote. So now when I'm writing my paper, if I want to use that quote, I already know the page number and I already know that it's a direct quote. And so it's going to be a lot easier for me to keep that straight. Something else is in red. I usually make my thoughts and comments be red when I've got those kinds of reactions to things. When I read something that makes me have a question, I typically underline it. That's my method. So this is what it looks like. I'm essentially doing that method number one, the structured summary. So this is how many pages? 21 pages of notes. So I read lots and lots of articles on this topic, and then I thought to myself, okay, so what's my argument? If I were to make an argument out of all this research and I want to make a claim, what's a way that I could do that? And so then I essentially turned over and I started doing method number two, theme-based notes. So you can't really see, but I printed off my notes And I sat down and I articulated what are some themes, what are some things that I'm noticing that lots of articles are saying from my research. One example here is a theme that I wrote down was placemaking is a key part of art inquiry. I wrote that, and then next to it, I put parentheses and I listed all of the articles that made that argument. So I've got 5 themes articulated here. If I want to write a paper, I've got my themes here. I can just pick one and then I can turn that into a paper and into an argument. And I've already got all my research there. So these were all the relevant people who were making those kinds of arguments in their articles. And that's what I'm going to want to look at if I choose to write a paper about that theme. Now it's worth noting that I'm not following an assignment. This is my own research. And so I don't have restrictions or guidelines to follow. It's simply what modes of inquiry do I want to follow? What rabbit holes do I want to go down? And that's something that I am deciding for myself. So I would really encourage you to spend some time with your assignment description that's requiring you to do research and to really think, okay, so what note-taking style is going to set me up well for turning my notes into a paper based on the assignment description. And finally, I want to show you real quick where to get help. When I was describing all the different ways that you can, save articles. So I mentioned off the cuff that you can save articles within Pirate Search itself. Now I'm going to show you, we've got under Research Help on the library's website, if you click Research Help, we've got a whole page right here called Research Tutorials, and we've got videos on this. We've got videos on, how to save articles in Pirate Search, how to use Google Scholar, how to pull citations from articles, how to save articles. We have lots of helpful video tutorials for you there. I encourage you to check this page out if you have any lingering questions that I did not answer in this video.